Hello, everyone. So, yeah, this is my part of the panel for PeriPeriCon, hosted generously by Arisa. Thank you for making this event possible. So, for this talk, originally I thought I should tell my stories about incorporating a business here in Ontario, Canada. But then after consulting with Arisa, I realized that there's also stories I could tell about some of the projects I've been doing. So there's gonna be like a lot of different topics here. So here's a rough plan. We will have like the business stuff and briefly some creative stuff, and then Q&A, and we can just go on any tangent that we might find interesting, because there are a lot of different topics here. So for business, I'm going to talk about a bit of the economic theory about why an indie studio or small business can have advantages and disadvantages compared to the larger businesses. So basically, if you are trying to decide if this is the path that's right for you, hopefully this can help you do that. And if any of you are interested, I have some stories about specific details in the incorporation process. Of course, that's going to be specific to where I am, so it might or might not be applicable to you. And let's begin. So in case you are here and you don't know anything about me because you just clicked on the link, here's a little bit about me so you know who is talking about these things. So right now, so I'm a professional animator. I worked in a couple animation studios for children's TV and Netflix shows. And after a while, I switched gears and now I'm doing my own stuff. And right now I'm making a browser game. We can talk more about that in a bit. I have an interest in computer games, specifically strategy games. I also like visual novels, which I know will be the subject of other panels later today. And I'll be looking forward to that. So I'm also interested in various philosophical perspectives. That's why I'm going to be analyzing this business in the art industry from kind of like a economic theory perspective, which I personally find is interesting. Hopefully you will see some of that too. So let's jump into the surprising advantages of being a small fish. So if we start talking about indie studios, everybody will probably think of like these stories that contrast the small studios with the big ones. And for example, you might think of like, oh, some of the big studios, like EA or like they are infamous for screwing over their customers with like DLCs or overpriced microtransactions. And you might wonder, like, I mean, why would they do that? Like, it's just, are they just greedy? Yeah, so, and then you contrast that with like the love that some of the small indie studios get, and people are like, oh, these guys are so dedicated to their craft and they just want to make a good game and people love them. So we're gonna analyze a bit about why this might happen, because if you think about it, like the big fish, they're just greedy. That's not really an explanation in my opinion, because, well, anybody could be greedy. So, and if the greed hurts you, then why would you do it? So it's not a full explanation in my opinion. And I think if we analyze that a bit, we can find some interesting things here. So why can a company become out of touch? In my opinion, I can think of two main categories. Either they're doing it intentionally or they're doing it unintentionally, right? So if they're doing it intentionally, then basically they're preferring short-term profits over long-term profits. And the important thing here is that this is not dependent on company size. So the thing we were talking about earlier were like, oh, the big companies are greedy bastards. Well, I mean, it's conceivable that a small company would do this too, right? Like if they see that, oh, we can make tons of money now and it might make people unhappy in the future, but, you know, then we already have our money at that point. Like they will be heavily incentivized to do that. So this is something that everybody should be careful of, but it's only part of the potential problem. So the other part, the unintentional part, is even if they're not intentionally making a trade-off between short-term profit and long-term profit, and they know that if they screw over their customers now, they'll have a harder time later, and they don't want that. For some reason or another, which we will get into, they might make mistakes and still lead them down to that path. So why could this possibly happen? Well, so a larger company is a system of people working together under like hopefully aligned incentives. And the way they align the incentive is to pay their employees. So one of the fundamental problems here is that they probably pay their employees and then they give them like goals to work towards. For example, if you're a sales rep, you get like a quota to meet. If you're a community manager, you might have some directions from, you know, upper management of the company telling you what they want to see in the community and stuff. But then, you know, at the end of the day, their day-to-day job is to do these tasks and then they get paid. So their incentive for them immediately is just to, you know, earn a living. They're not really gonna be totally looking towards like years in the future for the company. So this is gonna be a challenge for any company, but it will be more challenging for larger ones because now they have like a structure where you have layers of this hierarchy, and you have like the top management like sending orders to middle management, and then they send their orders to lower management, and at each tier they're kind of like myopic, right? So they only see like, I have to meet these goals set by my superiors, but other than that, you know, I'm personally not affected. So this is where one person doing this is not gonna be a huge deal either way, but the thing is, like, if every level does that and everybody in a company does that, you get like misaligned incentives. So like an example of this would be a few years ago, I believe, or yeah, I think it's a few years ago at this point. Like, you had an interesting story of American banks becoming caught doing fraud, and what they did was like they opened millions of fake accounts for people, and ultimately this happened because the salespeople that opened these accounts were incentivized to open accounts. They get paid based on how many accounts they open. So then they figured, well, if they're not going to catch me making fake accounts, then might as well do that. So obviously that doesn't benefit the company if you think about it, right? Like the bank doesn't actually make money with empty accounts that don't give them anything. But nevertheless, it happened. So this is not to say that this is the problem that's always going to happen with any company and it's all doom and gloom. But because this is the part that gets more difficult the larger a company is, it's one of the ways where small companies outperform big ones. So now we're going to talk about some of the advantages of small companies, one which maybe you are looking to start. So if you're working for yourself, you don't have any of the problems that I mentioned earlier because you are totally aligned with your own incentives, right? Like everything you do is going to be also for the company. And if you do something right, you get the benefits. And if you do something wrong, you will face the consequences. And a lot of small companies will probably agree that hiring your first employee is one of the most expensive things you can do. And it's not just the salary cost. It's not just, oh, now I have to pay this person this amount of money. It's more of like, from an efficiency point of view, paying people a normal salary is fine if you get like that much value back. The problem is like compared to yourself, compared to paying yourself and getting your own value, paying someone else and getting their value is less efficient a lot of the time because of the things I mentioned earlier, right? Because you're going to have like specific tasks for them, and there's going to be friction between your planning and their actual execution of the tasks. So of course, solutions to these problems exist, but the thing is, they require specific interventions. So that's like it's we can't really talk about that in general. So it really depends on the specific situation. And this is basically the definition of management, and why, even though sometimes people like to shit talk on managers, once a company gets large enough, they're really necessary to do this coordination among everyone. But yeah, if your company is smaller, then it's not as difficult. So going back to how we started this conversation, we were talking about how smaller indie studios have like a reputation of treating people right. And I would say, yeah, they do. And this is only the part that's really noticeable. In fact, they have a bunch of advantages over the bigger companies, and the better public relations part is only the forward-facing part, right? The part that you as a customer sees. The part that you don't see is everything they do can be more flexible because they don't have to deal with the loss of efficiency in a larger organization. So for anyone who wants to do their own small business, you can use this to your advantage. So if you, for example, if you're looking to make a new product or a new service, then you can easily pivot to that, and you don't have to like do as much convincing other people as you might need to in a larger company, right? So with that faster turnaround in products and stuff, you could find really niche opportunities that a bigger company might just be impossible to enjoy. Now, what are some of the disadvantages? Because we talked about the advantages, but we should also be aware of the disadvantages if you want to start your own business. So first of all, you're on the wrong end of economies of scale. You probably have heard of this term. And the idea is pretty simple, right? So the more things you make, the cheaper, like the better you get at it, so the cheaper every next thing that you make, each additional item is. So this could apply to not just products, but also training employees, right? So if you have a system in a bigger company that trains employees, it's going to be much cheaper for you to hire more people. And then there's also barriers to entry that are basically big costs that any business might need. And a larger business, it's a smaller proportion of their total expenses. And for you, it might be a big portion of your expense. For example, if you need business insurance, if you need licenses for like legal purposes, they might have just a fee, and that fee might be significant for someone who just wants to just starting out. And I mentioned insurance in particular because depending on what you're doing, right? So personally, when I applied for, so I incorporated my business a few years ago, and when I applied for some programs, for some government programs, they were like, "Oh, we would like to see the insurance part of your budget," and I'm like, if I buy insurance, would it be worth it? So I started looking into it, and my personal conclusion is that it's not worth it for me, and I believe it's probably not worth it for most small businesses, because here's the thing, like, the problem with the insurance is, can you really expect to claim the insurance if you need to? Because the whole reason you're buying it is that if something goes wrong, you have that money to compensate, right? So for example, if you have like loss of business insurance, which means every month you pay a little bit, and then if something catastrophic happens, for example, a pandemic, and suddenly your business revenue tanks, then you can go to the insurance company and be like, okay, so now you should, according to our contract, you should be paying me money now. And then the problem here is that the person who's supposed to be paying you is the one who's deciding whether they should pay you. So this is a bad incentive, like we were talking about earlier, right? They don't want to pay you, so most likely they will find some excuse like, oh, there's this small print, or there's this other thing, or even if they have absolutely no excuse, they can just refuse to pay you and be like, see you in court. And as a small business, you might not be able to fight them in court. So yes, you can buy insurance. I've looked into it. As a small business, it might even be affordable, but the question of whether you actually should buy it, it's highly dependent on whether you think you can actually claim the insurance if you need it. And I really don't know about that. I think it's very dubious. So some solutions to the disadvantages that I talked about, for example, the insurance. If you can't rely on actual insurance companies, you should still have like something to cushion your business. And in this case, I basically would recommend having your own insurance, your insurance at home, your homemade one, right? So that's pretty simple. You just have some money stashed away for your business purposes. And it also is not limited to just money. It could also be your flexibility in operations. For example, if your product is depending on like supplies from like supplier A, and you're afraid like, okay, what if that stops working, but then you could switch to supplier B if that does happen. So normally you might want insurance for that because that interrupts your business. But if you're a small business and you can easily change your supply chain, then that in itself is a kind of insurance, right? And these types of personal insurances or savings, they benefit you the whole time. And I think this is very interesting because it's not just like, I have some money stashed away and I guess it's nice if I need it someday, but since I don't need it, it's basically just sitting there doing nothing. No, it's not just sitting there doing nothing. It should actually be helping your business the entire time, because it means you're changing your level of acceptable risk. So for example, if you didn't have that money, you would be making your business decisions like, if I do this, it will be nice, but the risk is too high. And if this fails, then it's really bad for me, so I cannot do it. But then if you have this savings fund saved up, you can be like, yes, I can take this risk, and the benefits are great, and even if it goes wrong, I have a plan for that. So I think it helps you continuously as it exists, so it's not just sitting there doing nothing. So I would highly recommend that. And going back to the economies of scale thing we were talking about earlier, so a possible solution for that would just be recognize when you are at a disadvantage, and it shouldn't be that hard because economies of scale apply to what they call fungible goods. Fungible goods are things that are basically similar enough that you can interchange one for another. For example, like $1 bill, well, in the US, or a dollar coin here, is interchangeable with another dollar. It doesn't matter which one as long as it's one of them, right? And if you have a product that like one of your competitors come up with that's similar enough to yours, and you know that they can make it for much cheaper, that's when you know you have to do something, because if you just let it sit there, eventually you're probably going to get out competed. So that's when you have to think of stuff like, how do I make my thing unique? And that should be the essence of small business, so we don't have to get into the details of that, as long as you recognize it. So now we can go into some specific experiences I had. If you want me to elaborate on any of these, please mention it in the chat, and we can delve deeper into it. Basically, I can say that in my location in Ontario, Canada, starting is relatively cheap. You can incorporate, or you don't even have to incorporate. I know some people would just like to operate as a sole proprietorship. That means you can start doing your business, and legally your business is the same as you, a person. So all your income and stuff gets counted as your personal income. But if you want to incorporate, which means you set up a legal distinction between yourself and your business operations, that is relatively cheap as well. So in my experience, I did that. It's just like signing some forms digitally and sending them online. It's very easy. And then you pay a fee of 200 Canadian dollars for this. And then to renew it, for me, it was 12 per year. So that's a really easy entry point in my opinion. Of course, as a business, you might want to, like, once you start getting revenue, you might want to hire like a professional accountant who knows how to do the accounting for taxes and blah blah blah. But if you're just starting out, you don't need that immediately, right? It's like I just figured out doing streaming the other day, and you don't have to buy a new camera, a new microphone, and blah blah blah. You can just start with what you have, and then if you keep being successful in what you're doing, you can upgrade your equipment. Same idea here, right? If you start a small business, you don't immediately have to get every single thing a business needs. You only need to get the thing you're using immediately. In my case, since I started a business that is not generating any revenue, I don't need to hire an accountant, right? So for taxes and stuff, I can just fill out some of the forms myself. It's pretty simple. And that really cuts down on the cost. But as we said earlier, you still want like a savings fund. You want capital to draw from, because in case you need it, right? But my point is, you don't need to spend it immediately, actually. And here's some help if you want to start your own business, because depending on where you are, you probably have government incentive for small businesses. And the reason these exist is basically because they want to help you overcome those initial hurdles we were talking about earlier. So you can probably just search your government website in whatever jurisdiction you are in. I can use my example. So here in Canada, I've looked into, these are just 3 examples, right? So Ontario Creates is a organization that has a thing called the Interactive Digital Media Fund, and you can see their URL here, ontariocreates.ca. I've applied for this a few times myself. I have not been successful in my application, but I kind of see like how the whole thing works now. And yeah, they are kind of selective about it, but you know, I think if you are going to do something like this, you could look into it. It's a good opportunity. There's also the Canada Media Fund, a similar thing. They have loans and grants. So loans, you have to pay them back. Grants, you don't. They just give you free money. And there's, in Canada here, there's like so many different funding programs. It would be too many to list. So actually you want to go to that third URL I have here, and that's basically a search function on the Canadian government website. You can just type in your criteria, like check some boxes, and it'll give you a list of all the things you might qualify for, so then you can see which ones you want to apply. And that basically concludes my talk about the business portion. I guess I'll briefly go through some of the creative stuff that I've experienced, and then we can move on to the Q&A. So right now I'm making a game, and I think games are an awesome medium because they combine a bunch of, they're like a meta medium, right? They combine other media. So you have the visual stuff, which give you specific details on the thing you're looking at. Like if you're in an alien world, you can see the alien environment, but then you also have, in a game, you have music, which is best at invoking emotions immediately, right? If you hear scary music, immediately you know the atmosphere is supposed to be scary. And then this can tell a story, and all that put together, I think, is something that's really impressive. The project I'm working on right now is a browser game, and I think there's something interesting about the browser, because these days browsers are basically operating systems. Like you can have entire apps whose client side run on the browser, and so I think we're going to have a renaissance of browser games. If you remember, like maybe 10 years ago, or more than that at this point, we had like lots of Flash games on the web. We had websites like Newgrounds. And people just loved playing like simple games on the browser. Oh yes, Neopets, but that's like a long time ago, even even older than what I was thinking of, right? Yeah. I think that stuff, that genre of games is gonna come back. I mean, to some extent, I believe they're already coming back on Facebook, right? Like Facebook has their built-in like gaming platform where they host what seems to be like Flash games. I'm not sure exactly how it works. But basically, yeah, I think the capabilities of web browsers have gotten to a point where they're basically operating systems, and our computers are powerful enough to render stuff that were not possible on browsers 10 years ago, but now you could. So you can even, like, I believe like 3D stuff are okay on the browser, right? And that was unimaginable like decades ago. One of the projects I did a long time ago, back when I was in art school in Sheridan College, interactive with better, yeah. So yeah, I remember in art college, some of the animation teachers were saying like, oh, we are using Flash, but did you hear the web is transitioning to HTML5? And I clearly remember because at the time I had an opinion on that. I'm like, okay, but that's like web standards. Like HTML5, it's for rendering a web page. It's still kind of hard to do animation. If you want to do animation, you want to draw stuff and then drag them around, and you're working in an environment where visually what you see is what you get. And that's definitely not HTML. If you worked with HTML, you know what I'm talking about. You just write some, it's like XML tags, right? You write code and then it turns into visuals. And I thought like there would always be a place for Flash animation because artistically it's just easier to work with Flash. Okay, cross-platform. Yeah, I think. Oh, that's a really good point because I forgot to bring this up earlier when I was praising browser stuff. The browser is special as a platform because it's by definition cross-platform, right? If you have a website, the way we expect websites to work is that it doesn't matter if you're viewing from Chrome or Safari, from like an Apple computer or a Windows computer. So the entire web standard is already has built-in cross-platform compatibility, something that is harder for like a native app, right? I know that it's not that hard if you're doing stuff like Unity. Yeah, and this opens the door for things like multiplayer that's just straight out works out of the box, right? If you have a game that's a browser-based like web app, like you can be playing it on your phone and someone else could be playing on their desktop, and since you're both using browsers, it doesn't really make any difference to the developer. They just develop for that browser platform and it works on every device. So that's a huge advantage in my opinion. And so yeah, that allows me to segue to the thing I was thinking about earlier. So one of my older projects when I was in school was to make I tried my hand at making some apps and putting them on the Google Play Store. So that's where I'm coming from with this perspective. Because with that experience, I found like, oh, I would rather just make a web app. You know, like so what I did was I made my app in Flash. And then I could export that for Android phones or for iPhones. And then I upload that to like the Google Play Store for Android or to the Apple Store for the iPhones. But then like the problem was they would require updates, like whenever they updated Android or iPhone, you have to update your app or else your app will be broken. And then, you know, I never really got revenue for it, but I hear from other people that like there's problems with that too. I mean, recently we had that whole scandal with like Apple taking like a huge cut and games like Fortnite protesting, right? That was interesting. So if you are operating a browser, you are controlling your own publishing platform. And that's also an advantage you can use, right? You are not being held hostage to any of these app stores, right? Yeah. So now just a little tangent. If you are making your own apps, one of these days people really are careful about like their passwords and stuff. So one of the basic rules is that you don't store your own password. So I came across this when I made my own app for like a map of my school, which people could sign up for. And then I was looking into like, oh, so how would I do the login features for this? And I looked a bit into like the basics of a login system. So if it's your first time doing something like that, just very simple advice, just use like something that's already been made by other people and usually how it works is they don't store the password. They just take the password, they do a hash function which like scrambles it, and you store the scrambled version of the password. You never store their password, and this will make sure you will never ever get any bad PR with people complaining that like, oh, my account got hacked because you have bad security practices. You can be like, no, I'm perfectly safe. This is completely industry standard. Yeah, so that was a little tangent on that. Those were all the things that I thought would be interesting, but yeah, time for any additional questions. If anything I mentioned piques your fancy, yeah, feel free to ask. Okay, do browser games limit the scope you can work in your game? Imagine that since you're not downloading a large amount of game assets to your device, there must be an upper limit. Yes, yeah. So obviously there are advantages and disadvantages to using the browser as a game platform instead of making a native game. Like, I haven't ran into the technical issues, right? But I mean the technical limits. I haven't really tested that in my current project yet, but I expect to do that sooner or later. And I mean, if anyone has experience in this, please chime in. Yeah, from what I understand, something like Chrome is already very memory heavy, right? So that could like chug your computer to slow down because it's not designed for game graphics. But then here's the thing, like things that we find fun, a lot of the old school retro games were played on way worse hardware and like software systems back in the day, like 10 years ago, right? That's why I'm saying like we will have a browser renaissance, because browsers have gotten to the point where we can play games that required like a dedicated system 10 or 15 years ago, and a lot of people still find that fun. So why not play that on a browser? Now it's just much easier. I am pretty sure you can run like, Game Boy games and stuff on the browser, no problem. And the limit is probably like much higher than that. As for like downloading, like there's ways to optimize it. So you want to preload stuff and stuff that you don't use. I imagine like the browser probably has rules about what it gets rid of when you're not using them, so it doesn't like just keep them in memory forever. But basically, yes, that's something you have to look at. Yeah, Flash games, we remember when they take forever to load. Yeah, one of the games that really inspired me to do my current project was an old Flash game called Tactics Arena Online. And I remember the loading time for that Flash game was like 2 minutes, like literally like 120 seconds, right? Something like that. We would load up the game, we go play something else, we come back and it's like, okay, it's almost loaded. But I believe like that's probably like a internet bottleneck, right? These days we have gigabits in terms of internet bandwidth. If you think about it, streaming a video takes a lot more data than like downloading game assets. Assuming you have like a kind of normal 2D game, like in my opinion, there's no way that your 2D assets would be larger than like a 15-minute YouTube video, right? So from that estimate, I think you can, like, the limit for graphics is pretty high relatively. You're still not gonna get stuff that you want, like the next gen graphics on a browser. Of course, you're not gonna have like full ray tracing and stuff like that. But I basically think the limit is high enough that you can have tons of fun games made on the browser. Have your experiences in the animation industry informed the creative process for your game development? I wouldn't say directly. No, I can't think of any relation. Basically, for my project, it's like half business and half just a passion project, right? For this project, I expect to I'm trying to make some revenue from it, but I'm not optimizing it for revenue, because in that case, it would just be like making something simple and cheap, but that can get lots of players, and that will probably be like a mobile game, like a Candy Crush clone or something. And I'm just not that interested in those things personally. So my decision process for my game project is basically just something that I enjoy making and I would enjoy playing. And then leaning enough into like the business side to try to make a profit from that. That's basically my decision making process for making a game. Alright, so if we don't have any other questions, we are coming close to an hour. It's been like 45 minutes. Oh, here's another one. If you were part of mobile gaming team for some studios, you'd see animators mostly doing assets for the game. Wait, I'm not sure if I understand the comment completely. Oh, yeah. You mean like if I worked in mobile gaming studios, it would help more with like making a mobile game, like decisions for that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, because I worked in, like, as I mentioned, I worked in animation for children's shows, so that's not really interactive or anything. So I guess it's too far removed from gaming. Gaming is just my hobby, right? Like, the reason I'm doing it is completely different from my work experience. All right, so I think we will end the stream here then. It's been in 45 minutes. Glad to chat with you all. Oh, more comments. Hold on. Yeah. Yeah, personally, my experience in coding is self-taught. And funny enough, we were talking about Flash earlier. Like, that's how I started with both animation and coding, because you can animate stuff in Flash and you can also program Flash to do interactive stuff. And yeah, I've been doing both since that time. I think it's pretty easy. I mean, if you guys are interested in coding, I would suggest Codecademy. I think it's codecademy.com. Let me see. Yeah, codecademy.com. Right, I'll put that in the chat. I find this very good. Like, they have free courses on probably everything you need to get started. I used their free course to get started on Python, and yeah, that's what I use for the back end of my game. All right, so I know there's another panel coming up soon, so I don't want to like run into that time. So I will look forward to. Oh, okay. Last question from the organizer herself. Yes. Oh, what are some of the struggles I face with my startup? Okay. Okay. Sorry to be pedantic a little, but basically, startup is like you get a bunch of funding for a good idea you have, but I would say my thing doesn't really qualify as a startup, right? So that's why earlier the advice I was giving was basically limited to specific stuff. Like if you were interested in like the fees of incorporating, I told you it was $200. But like as for business starting off, I think mine is too removed from like a normal reason to start a business, because my reason is basically like I really want to make this game project, and I actually don't think that's a very good idea if you want to do a business. Like it, yes, you have to be into what you're doing. You can't find a torturous, or else you'll probably never be good at what you're doing. But I don't think you should start a business just because you like it. You should also think about the actual business. Like there should be a market opportunity, and you can actually make money, because otherwise you might lose money, and that's no fun, right? So in my case, mine is kind of a special case, because we were talking about that rainy day fun stuff. Like I have a whole different risk perspective. So right now, basically, I'm like taking huge amounts of risk, but because of my specific situation, I'm okay with that. I wouldn't recommend. Okay, I'm probably not answering the question. It's a specific struggles I faced. Basically, just finding out what I need, right? Yeah. Like when I started, I had no idea what the difference between a sole proprietorship and an incorporated corporation was. So I'm like, which one do I need? What do I do? So reading some primers for that is really useful. So then you know what you need, and you don't have to like run into any problems with the paperwork stuff. Yeah, sorry for going on a huge tangent earlier. I tend to do that. Alright, I think that will conclude our stream. Yeah, thanks everyone for watching the stream. We have, I think the next panel is like at 2 o'clock, right? So hope everyone will check that out as well. I certainly will be there watching. All right. See you there.